He rejected her for another noblewoman. So she married the Alpha King who had loved her for years. What happens when the person you chose decides to choose someone else? And what does it mean to discover that someone far more powerful has loved you all along? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story of love, destiny, and unexpected reversals. Thank you for spending your time with us and for continuing to support the channel. Your support makes every new story possible. And before we start, tell us in the comments, would you ever give a second chance to someone who rejected you for someone else? Now, settle in and stay with us as we return to the very beginning, when one choice was about to change everything. I choose Lady Victoria Harrington. The words were quiet, almost gentle, and somehow that made them hurt more. Emily Carter stood beneath the silver chandeliers of Silverpine Hall with Ryan Ashford's old promise ring hidden inside her closed hand, its tiny edge pressing into her palm as applause rolled through the room. For one strange second, she thought she had misunderstood him. 7 years of waiting could do that to a person. It could make the impossible seem more believable than the truth standing 10 feet away. But Ryan did not look at Emily. He turned toward Victoria, elegant in midnight blue silk, and offered her his hand before the gathered nobles. She accepted it with practiced grace. Around them, smiles appeared. Glasses lifted. Whispers traveled beneath the music like wind through dry leaves. Emily heard only fragments. A suitable match. An important family. Exactly what Silverpine needs. She forced herself to breathe. Once. Twice. Her lungs seemed to have forgotten the rhythm. Ryan had promised nothing publicly, and perhaps that was the cruelest part. Their promises had always belonged to quiet places, beside the lake when they were 17, beneath the old oak after his first alpha trial, on winter evenings when he had spoken about the future as though Emily already had a place inside it. She had believed him because she had loved him. Now Lady Victoria stood where Emily had once imagined herself standing. Smile, someone murmured nearby. Emily did not know whether the command was meant for her, but she lifted her chin anyway. She would not let this room watch her break. Across the hall, Ryan finally looked at her. His expression changed for half a heartbeat. Guilt, perhaps. Regret. Then Victoria touched his arm, and whatever Emily had seen disappeared. She slowly opened her hand. The little silver ring lay against her skin, warmed by years of being carried close to her heart. Tonight, it felt heavier than any crown. Emily closed her fingers around it again and stepped backward, away from the celebration. No one stopped her. Almost no one noticed. At the far end of the hall, beyond the nobles dressed in silver and blue, a tall man stood motionless beneath the shadow of a stone archway. King Alexander Blackwood had arrived without ceremony, wearing black formal clothes beneath the dark cloak reserved for the sovereign of the Northern Territories. Conversation softened wherever his gaze passed. Yet Alexander was not watching Ryan. He was not watching Victoria. His silver-gray eyes had settled on Emily. More precisely, on the hand she was trying so hard to keep from trembling. Emily turned toward the doors without seeing him. She crossed the marble floor with measured steps, holding together what remained of her dignity until the cold night air touched her face. Behind her, applause rose again. Alexander did not join it. He watched the doors close behind the woman he had once walked away from because he believed her heart belonged to another man. 7 years later, that man had finally let her go. The cold outside Silverpine Hall should have cleared Emily's head, but memory followed her into the night. She stopped beneath the stone portico, where warm light spilled through the tall windows behind her and turned the frost along the steps to gold. 7 years. That was how long she had built a future from Ryan Ashford's promises. She could still remember the first one. They had been 17, sitting beside Silverpine Lake with their shoes in the grass, watching moonlight tremble across the water. Ryan had been nobody important then, only the ambitious son of an aging alpha with more expectations than confidence. When I lead this pack, he had told her, I want someone beside me who remembers who I was before everyone started bowing. Emily had laughed and asked who would tolerate him that long. Ryan had looked at her as though the answer were obvious. You will. She had believed him. When he left for months of leadership training, she wrote every week. When political meetings kept him away from festivals, she saved him a place anyway. When his responsibilities grew heavier, she never complained that his letters became shorter or that his visits became less frequent. She told herself that love sometimes meant patience. What she had not understood was how easily patience could become waiting, and how quietly waiting could become a life. Behind the closed doors, music began again. Emily stared down at the ring in her palm. Ryan had given it to her 3 winters earlier, not as an official engagement ring, he had carefully explained, but as a promise that when the right time came, he would make everything official. The right time. She almost laughed now. Apparently the right time had arrived. Just not for her. Footsteps sounded behind her, and Emily straightened, expecting some curious guest. Instead, Ryan stepped outside. He had removed the ceremonial sash from his shoulder, but the confidence he had worn inside remained. Emily. Her name sounded familiar in his voice, which somehow made it worse. You should have told me before tonight, she said. Ryan exhaled slowly. I wanted to. But you did not. He looked toward the courtyard rather than at her. Victoria's family controls 3 major trade routes. Her uncle has influence with the Eastern Pax. Silverpine needs that alliance. Emily listened without interrupting. Each sentence was reasonable. Practical. Clean. 7 years reduced to numbers on a ledger. Did you ever love me? She asked. That finally made him look at her. His face softened, and for one dangerous moment she saw the boy beside the lake again. I did love you, Emily. Did. The word settled between them. Then Ryan continued, quieter now. But love was never enough to make you Luna. Something inside her went perfectly still. No tears came. No angry words. Emily simply opened her hand, looked once at the silver ring, and placed it in his palm. Ryan stared down at it. Emily, wait. She closed his fingers around the promise he had broken. You made your choice, she whispered. Then she walked past him toward the dark courtyard, unaware that from the shadowed doorway behind them, Alexander Blackwood had heard every word. Emily had almost reached the bottom of the courtyard steps when Ryan called her name again. This time, she stopped. Not because she wanted to hear more, but because 7 years deserved an ending that did not follow her into every quiet room for the rest of her life. The night air smelled of pine and winter frost. Behind them, Silverpine Hall glowed with celebration, its tall windows framing silhouettes of guests already returning to music and conversation. Ryan came down 2 steps, still holding the silver ring she had returned. I never meant to humiliate you, he said. Emily turned slowly. Then what did you think would happen? His jaw tightened. I thought you would understand. There it was. The expectation that had shaped so much of their relationship. Emily would understand when he missed dinner. Emily would understand when duty came first. Emily would understand when tomorrow became next month, and next month became another year. Now she was expected to understand why another woman would receive the future he had once described to her. Ryan lowered his voice. Silverpine is not what it was when we were younger. We need influence. We need stronger alliances. Victoria can give this pack things you cannot. Emily felt the words land, one by one, but she refused to lower her eyes. And what exactly can I not give you? Ryan hesitated. That hesitation answered her before he did. You are an Omega without a noble family, he finally said. You have no territory, no political connections, no seat on any council. Victoria was raised for this. She understands what being Luna requires. Emily remembered staying awake while Ryan studied for his first leadership examination, testing him on treaties until sunrise. She remembered organizing food for families after a brutal winter storm closed the northern road for nearly a week. She remembered knowing the names of elderly pack members Ryan sometimes forgot. None of those things had mattered because none came with a title. "So that is what you were waiting for," she said softly. "Not the right time. A better offer." Ryan flinched. "That is unfair." A small, tired smile touched Emily's mouth. "No, Ryan. It is accurate." He stepped closer, frustration replacing guilt. "What do you want me to say? That I should risk the future of an entire pack because we made promises when we were 17? I want nothing from you." The certainty in her own voice surprised her. Ryan stared at her. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps anger would have been easier for him. Emily gave him neither. "You chose Victoria. I accept that choice. Emily. But you do not get to choose what I do after it." Silence settled over the courtyard. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl called through the trees. Ryan looked down at the ring in his hand. "I hope someday you understand why I did this." Emily pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. "And I hope someday you understand what it cost." She turned away. At the top of the steps, hidden beyond the warm spill of light, Alexander remained perfectly still. He had come to Silverpine expecting diplomacy, speeches, and another evening of noble ambition. Instead, he had heard the woman he had never forgotten being told that love was worth less than lineage. Emily disappeared beneath the archway leading toward the guest residences. Only then did Alexander's gaze shift to Ryan. There was no anger in the king's expression. Something quieter rested there. Recognition. Because Alexander knew something Ryan did not. Emily Carter had never needed a greater name to make her worthy of standing beside a king. Emily did not sleep that night. She sat beside the narrow window of her guest room while Silverpine slowly fell silent around her, watching frost gather along the glass until the courtyard below disappeared beneath a pale silver haze. She had cried only once, quietly, after locking the door. Not because Ryan had chosen Victoria. That pain was sharp, but simple. What hurt more was realizing how many years she had spent making herself smaller so his future would have room to grow. She had called it patience. She had called it loyalty. She had even called it love. Near midnight, Emily opened the small wooden box she had brought with her and began packing. 2 dresses. A worn book. Her mother's ivory comb. Nothing else seemed important anymore. When she lifted a folded cream-colored handkerchief from the bottom of the box, her fingers paused. Tiny black pine branches had been embroidered along one corner, uneven stitches from when she had first learned needlework as a teenager. Emily frowned. She had made 2 like it years ago. She still had one. The other had disappeared during a winter she barely remembered. She tucked it away and closed the box. Across the estate, Alexander Blackwood stood alone in the library reserved for royal guests. A fire burned low behind him, throwing amber light across shelves of old books, but he had not moved for several minutes. In his hand rested a cream-colored handkerchief. Age had softened the fabric. The black thread at its corner had faded slightly, but the crooked pine branches remained unmistakable. 7 years earlier, a 17-year-old girl had pressed it into his hand without knowing his name. Alexander could still remember snow falling through the trees that afternoon, the ache of exhaustion in his bones after days of traveling under an ordinary soldier's cloak, and the startled expression on Emily Carter's face when she found him resting beside the road. She had not asked whether he was wealthy. She had not asked what family he belonged to. She had simply offered him warm tea from a small metal flask and wrapped that handkerchief around his cold hand when she noticed it trembling. He had tried to return it. She had smiled. "Keep it. You look like you need it more than I do." Alexander had remembered those words long after he became king. He had returned to Silverpine months later intending to find her, only to see Emily beneath the old oak tree with Ryan. Ryan had taken her hand. Emily had looked at him with a happiness Alexander had no right to disturb. So he had left. Years passed. Treaties changed. Borders shifted. Alexander received offers from noble families across the territories, each presenting daughters with perfect manners and impressive names. He declined them all. No one knew why. Tonight, he finally understood the strange cruelty of his silence. He had stayed away because he believed respecting Emily meant respecting the life she had chosen. But Ryan had accepted 7 years of her devotion only to measure her worth by what her family could offer. A soft knock sounded at the library door. Alexander folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it inside his coat. His royal secretary entered. "Your Majesty, the carriage is prepared for dawn." Alexander looked toward the dark window. Somewhere beyond it, Emily was preparing to leave Silverpine too. "Change the morning schedule," he said. "There is someone I need to see before I return to Blackwood." By dawn, Emily had convinced herself that leaving quietly would be easier than saying goodbye. Silverpine was still wrapped in blue morning light when she carried her small wooden box down the guesthouse steps. Frost covered the grass, and the air smelled of cedar smoke from chimneys beginning to wake across the estate. She had taken only what belonged to her. Everything else could remain behind with the version of herself who had spent 7 years waiting. She had nearly reached the carriage lane when she noticed 3 black coaches standing near the main courtyard. Silver wolves gleamed on their doors. Royal carriages. Emily slowed. Servants moved around them with unusual care, loading polished trunks while several guards waited beside dark horses. She remembered hearing that King Alexander Blackwood had attended the gathering, although she had never seen him among the crowd. That was hardly surprising. Kings did not notice women like Emily Carter. She lowered her gaze and continued walking. "Miss Carter." The voice behind her was calm and deep. Emily stopped. When she turned, the man standing 20 feet away seemed strangely familiar, though she could not understand why. Alexander wore a long black coat against the morning cold, his dark hair touched by the pale light. There was no crown on his head, yet nothing about him required one. Even the guards nearby seemed to hold themselves differently in his presence. Emily immediately lowered her head. "Your Majesty. Please do not do that." She looked up, uncertain. Alexander stepped closer, but stopped several feet away, leaving enough space that she did not feel cornered. His silver-gray eyes rested on her face with an attention that made her suddenly aware of how tired she must look. "I heard you were leaving." Emily tightened her fingers around the handle of her box. "I did not realize my travel plans were royal business." For a heartbeat, she feared she had spoken too sharply. Then something almost like amusement softened his expression. "They are not." "Then why are you here?" Alexander seemed to consider his answer. "Because I wanted to speak with you before you disappeared again." Again. The word caught her attention. Emily studied him more carefully. There was something about his eyes. Something buried beneath 7 years of memory. A snowy road. A young stranger in a plain soldier's cloak. A metal flask warming between cold hands. Her breath stopped. "No," she whispered. Alexander reached slowly inside his coat and withdrew a folded piece of cream-colored cloth. He opened it across his palm. Black pine branches crossed one corner in crooked stitches. Emily stared. Her wooden box suddenly felt too heavy. "You kept it?" Alexander looked down at the handkerchief, and when he answered, the king vanished from his voice for just a moment. "You gave it to me when I had very little worth keeping." The winter morning seemed to become impossibly quiet. Emily remembered that stranger now. He had looked exhausted and alone, and she had helped him because leaving him there had never occurred to her. She had never learned his name. "You were the soldier." "I was traveling without my title." Emily searched his face. "Why did you never tell me?" Alexander folded the cloth carefully. "I came back." Those 3 words landed with unexpected weight. "When?" "Months later." His gaze shifted toward the distant oak tree beyond the courtyard. Emily followed it, and understanding arrived before he continued. I saw you with Ryan. Alexander's expression remained composed, but his voice grew quieter. You looked happy. Emily could not speak. So I left, he said. Because whatever I wanted, I believed you had already chosen. Your Majesty, I think you are mistaking the girl I was for the woman standing here now. Emily barely recognized her own voice. Alexander's confession had opened a door into a past she had never known existed, and suddenly the quiet stranger from the snowy road was standing before her as the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Alexander did not argue. Perhaps I am, he said. That is why I would like the opportunity to know the woman standing here now. Emily looked away toward the frost-covered fields. Less than 12 hours ago, she had imagined leaving Silverpine alone, finding work somewhere far enough away that no one knew Ryan's name. Now a king was asking for a place in her future before she had even understood what remained of her past. I cannot give you what you want, she said. Alexander's expression did not change. You do not know what I want. Everyone knows what kings want. Then everyone has been speaking for me. His answer was so calm that Emily looked back at him. Alexander folded the old handkerchief and returned it carefully to his coat. Come to Blackwood Court, he said. Not as my mate. Not as my Luna. Come as my guest. Emily almost laughed from disbelief. And what will people call that? Whatever entertains them. That is easy for a king to say. Something shifted in his eyes. He understood. A rumor might inconvenience Alexander. It could define Emily. You are right, he said. It is easier for me. The simple admission disarmed her more than any argument could have. Alexander continued, so the choice is yours. If you want to leave this morning and never see me again, no one will stop you. If you want somewhere to begin again, Blackwood has a place for you. Before Emily could answer, voices drifted from the main entrance. Ryan appeared with Victoria beside him, followed by several Silverpine Council members. Ryan's confident expression faltered when he saw Emily standing with the king. Victoria recovered first, lowering her head gracefully. Your Majesty. We were told you were departing. Soon, Alexander replied. Ryan's gaze moved from him to Emily, then to the wooden box at her feet. Emily, what is happening? The question carried an old familiarity, as though he still expected an explanation. Emily felt that expectation and, for the first time, did not obey it. Alexander said nothing. He did not answer for her. He simply waited. Emily understood the significance of that silence. Ryan had spent years deciding when she should wait, when she should understand, when their future could begin. Alexander, with enough authority to command every wolf in the courtyard, was giving her something Ryan rarely had. A choice. Emily lifted her chin. I am leaving Silverpine. Ryan stepped forward. With him? That depends on me. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Ryan looked genuinely unsettled. Emily, you cannot simply disappear because you are upset. The old Emily might have softened at the concern in his voice. This Emily heard the assumption beneath it. She turned toward Alexander. How far is Blackwood? About 180 miles north. And if I decide after one day that I want to leave? A carriage will take you wherever you choose. Emily drew a slow breath. Then she handed her wooden box to the waiting royal attendant. I will come as your guest. Alexander inclined his head, nothing triumphant in his expression. Then you will be welcome. As Emily walked toward the black carriage, Ryan called her name once more. She did not turn around. For 7 years, she had waited for him to choose her. That morning, for the first time, Emily chose where she would go next. Blackwood appeared through the morning mist just before noon, its dark stone towers rising above miles of pine forest like something carved from the mountain itself. Emily watched from the carriage window as they passed through the outer gates, expecting cold faces and suspicious stares. Instead, she saw merchants opening their shops, children carrying baskets across the square, and workers hanging winter lanterns along the main road. It did not look like the severe royal capital she had imagined. Alexander rode ahead for most of the journey, giving her space without making a performance of it. That restraint unsettled her almost as much as his attention had. At Silverpine, every kindness from Ryan had eventually seemed to come with an expectation. Alexander had asked for nothing. When the carriage stopped before Blackwood Palace, Emily stepped onto the stone drive and immediately noticed the people waiting beneath the entrance arch. Advisors, attendants, guards, and several noble families had gathered to welcome their king. Their polite expressions changed when they saw her. Curiosity first. Then calculation. Emily knew those looks. By sunset, half the capital would know that an unknown Omega had arrived in the Alpha King's carriage. Alexander approached her. "You can still change your mind." She glanced at the enormous palace behind him. "You really intend to remind me of that every 5 minutes?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "Only until you believe me." He led her inside without touching her. That detail should not have mattered. Somehow, it did. The entrance hall stretched nearly 60 feet beneath a vaulted ceiling, but Alexander did not parade her through it. He introduced her simply as Miss Emily Carter, a guest of the crown, and instructed the household to treat her accordingly. No invented title. No claim. No explanation. By afternoon, Emily had been given a quiet suite overlooking the eastern gardens. Fresh clothes had been placed in the wardrobe, but nothing extravagant. On the desk sat paper, books, and a small pot of winter roses. She touched one pale petal and wondered whether Alexander had chosen them. A knock came at the door. Alexander waited outside rather than entering. "Walk with me?" Emily hesitated, then followed him into the garden. Snow edged the hedges, and their footsteps sounded softly against the gravel path. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally Emily asked, "Why did you bring me here?" Alexander looked ahead. "I invited you here. You came. You know what I mean." He stopped beside a frozen fountain. "Then ask me what you actually want to know." Emily's heartbeat quickened. "Did you bring me here because you feel sorry for me?" "No, because Ryan rejected me." "No, because of something I did 7 years ago?" Alexander was silent for a moment. "That is where I first noticed you. It is not why I asked you here." Emily folded her arms against the cold. "Then why?" His silver-gray eyes met hers. "Because I have spent 7 years trying to forget someone who never knew I remembered her." The honesty left her speechless. Alexander reached into his coat, but instead of the handkerchief, he withdrew a small velvet box. Emily's stomach tightened. He opened it. A simple moonstone ring caught the winter light. "Alexander, I cannot." "I know." He closed the box immediately. No anger. No wounded pride. "Then why show me?" "Because I will not hide my intentions from you the way others have." Emily stared at him. "I loved Ryan." "I know. Part of me probably still does." His expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I know that too." She searched his face. "And you can accept that?" Alexander returned the ring to his pocket. "I can accept that your heart belongs to you." Then he stepped aside, leaving the path open before her. "I waited 7 years without asking you for anything, Emily. I can wait longer." For the next 3 days, Alexander did exactly what Emily had not expected him to do. He left her alone. There were no flowers arriving every hour, no royal invitations disguised as commands, no whispered reminders of the moonstone ring in his pocket. At breakfast, a place was available for her at the royal table, but no one came to collect her when she chose to eat beside the eastern windows instead. In the afternoons, she wandered through Blackwood's library, gardens, and crowded Market Square with an attendant walking far enough behind to feel like protection rather than supervision. Freedom felt unfamiliar. Emily kept waiting for someone to tell her what she owed in return. No one did. On the fourth morning, she found Alexander in the palace library surrounded by maps and reports. He looked up as she entered. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. "Yes." Emily stopped. Alexander closed the document in front of him. "Fortunately, I wanted to be interrupted." A laugh escaped her before she could prevent it. The sound startled her. She could not remember the last time laughter had come without effort. Alexander seemed to notice, but he did not make the moment heavier by mentioning it. Instead, he gestured toward the chair opposite him. Beside it waited a cup of tea. Emily smelled cinnamon and orange peel. Her favorite. She looked at him suspiciously. "How did you know?" "You ordered it twice yesterday." "You noticed that?" Alexander lifted one shoulder. "I notice things." Ryan had once spent an entire winter forgetting that Emily hated peppermint. She immediately disliked herself for making the comparison. Alexander was not a scale on which she should measure Ryan's failures. She sat down. "What are you working on?" "Winter supply routes." He turned one map toward her. Several northern villages had been isolated by early snowfall. Emily studied the marked roads. "Why send everything through Greyhaven?" Alexander's eyes narrowed with interest. "Because it is the largest road. It is also 20 miles longer." She pointed toward a smaller route through the eastern valley. "There is an old mill road here. Silverpine merchants used it before the bridge was built." Alexander leaned closer to the map. "Can wagons pass?" "Smaller ones." He called for his secretary and asked for updated surveys. No one laughed at her suggestion. No one reminded her that she was an Omega without a council seat. By evening, the eastern route had been confirmed usable. The change would save nearly a day of travel. Emily stood near the library window while Alexander signed the revised orders. "You listen to me," she said. He glanced up. "You were right." The answer was so simple that it hurt. She turned toward the darkening gardens before he could see her expression. "Ryan used to say I worried about things that were not my responsibility." Alexander set down his pen. "Ryan is not here." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "I know. You do not have to stop loving someone on the same day they disappoint you." She turned back. There was no jealousy in his face, only patience. "Why are you making this so easy?" she whispered. Alexander regarded her for a long moment. "I am not trying to make you love me, Emily." His voice softened. "I am trying to make sure you remember that you are allowed to be yourself while you decide what comes next." For years, she had believed love meant proving she could fit beside someone. Standing there in the quiet library, Emily began to wonder whether real love might feel entirely different. Perhaps it was not a place she had to earn. Perhaps it was the first place where she was never asked to disappear. The letter from Silverpine arrived on Emily's 6th morning at Blackwood, sealed with Ryan Ashford's personal crest. She recognized the dark green wax before the attendant placed it beside her breakfast, and for several seconds she simply watched steam rise from her tea. A week earlier, seeing that seal would have made her heart race. Now it made something inside her tighten with caution. She opened the letter slowly. Ryan's words were polite at first. Silverpine was adjusting to the new alliance. Victoria's family had already begun reviewing trade agreements and council appointments. Then the careful language disappeared. He wanted Emily to return. Not permanently, he claimed. He only wanted to talk. Things had become complicated. Victoria expected changes Ryan had not anticipated. Her family wanted authority over decisions that had always belonged to Silverpine. Ryan wrote that he finally understood how much Emily had quietly handled for years. Emily read that sentence twice. Not how much he missed her. How much she had handled. She folded the letter and set it beside her plate. "Bad news?" Alexander's voice came from the doorway. Emily looked up. He had stopped rather than entering, waiting for permission as he always did. Ryan wants me to come back. Something flickered across Alexander's face, gone almost immediately. Do you want to? The question irritated her because it was exactly the question she did not know how to answer. You are not going to tell me I should refuse? No, you are not going. To remind me what he did? You remember. Emily pushed back her chair and walked toward the window. Snow had begun falling over the eastern garden, soft flakes disappearing against the dark hedges. He says Victoria's family is interfering with Silverpine. That sounds like a matter for Silverpine's alpha. I used to help him with those matters. I know. She turned. How? Alexander's expression softened. Because Ryan mentioned your work more often than he mentioned you. Emily stared at him. The words should have hurt. Instead, they clarified something she had refused to see. Ryan had valued what she did while refusing to value the woman doing it. I thought he needed me, she whispered. Perhaps he did. Alexander approached, stopping several feet away. Being needed and being loved are not always the same thing. Emily looked down at the letter. And what if I still care what happens to him? Then you care. No judgment. No demand. Alexander's calm made her chest ache in a different way. You make everything sound simple. It is not simple. His gaze held hers. If you told me today that you wanted to return to Silverpine, I would have a carriage ready within the hour. Emily searched his face for resentment. Even knowing how you feel about me? Especially because of how I feel about you. Silence filled the room. Alexander drew a slow breath. I have wanted you here for longer than you know. But I will not keep you here by turning your uncertainty into an obligation. Emily thought of Ryan asking her to wait. Ryan asking her to understand. Ryan deciding what was best and expecting her to fit herself around the decision. Then she looked at Alexander, who had more power than Ryan could ever possess and seemed determined not to use any of it against her. Emily picked up the letter. For one moment, 7 years pulled at her from the page. Then she crossed to the fireplace and placed the folded paper into the empty brass tray beside it. She did not destroy it. She did not need to. I am not going back, she said. Alexander remained still. Because of me? Emily shook her head. Because I finally understand why he wants me there. She met Alexander's eyes. And it is not the reason I spent 7 years hoping for. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood, Emily realized she was no longer waiting for Ryan to regret losing her. She was beginning to build a life in which his regret did not matter. The first warning came before sunrise, when the palace bells rang 3 times across Blackwood. Emily woke to hurried footsteps beyond her door and voices moving through the corridor with controlled urgency. She dressed quickly and stepped outside just as Alexander's secretary appeared. What happened? She asked. The man hesitated. His Majesty was traveling to inspect the eastern supply route. His carriage encountered trouble near the mountain pass. Emily felt the floor disappear beneath her. Is he hurt? He is alive. Nothing after those words seemed clear. Emily followed the secretary downstairs, where the entrance hall had filled with royal attendants. Snow blew through the open doors. Nearly an hour later, horses appeared beyond the gates, followed by a carriage moving slowly through the white morning. Emily forgot every rule of royal etiquette and ran outside. Alexander stepped down with assistance, pale and exhausted but standing. Relief struck her so suddenly that she stopped several feet away, unable to speak. His silver-gray eyes found her immediately. Emily. She crossed the remaining distance. You frightened me. The words came out sharper than she intended. Alexander almost smiled. I apologize. Do not apologize. Sit down. For once, the Alpha King obeyed without argument. The palace physician examined him and declared that exhaustion and the bitter cold were the greatest concerns. Alexander had remained outside far too long after helping redirect stranded travelers from the blocked mountain road. He needed warmth, rest, and absolutely no council meetings. Alexander objected to the final instruction. Emily supported it. By evening, she sat beside the fireplace in his private study while he rested on a couch beneath a heavy wool blanket. The storm tapped softly against the windows. "You should sleep," she said. "You have said that 4 times. Because you have ignored me 4 times. His eyes closed. "You sound remarkably comfortable giving orders to a king." "Someone has to." A faint smile appeared on his face. Minutes later, his breathing finally settled. Emily remained beside him. She told herself she stayed because the physician might return, because the fire needed tending, because leaving seemed unnecessarily rude. None of those explanations survived when she looked at Alexander's sleeping face and felt the fear return. For one terrible hour that morning, she had believed she might lose him before she had understood what he had become to her. That realization frightened her more than Ryan's rejection ever had. Ryan had belonged to 7 years of memory. Alexander was becoming part of the future she had only just begun allowing herself to imagine. Near midnight, Alexander stirred. His eyes opened slowly and found her hand resting beside his on the blanket. At some point, without noticing, Emily had taken his hand. She almost pulled away. Alexander did not tighten his fingers. He simply looked at her, leaving even that small choice to her. Emily stayed. "You are still here," he murmured. "Yes." "Why?" The question was quiet, without expectation. Emily could have offered a dozen safe answers. Instead, she looked down at their joined hands. "Because when they told me something had happened to you, I was afraid." Alexander became very still. "Emily. Do not make me explain it yet." His thumb moved once across her knuckles, gentle enough to feel like a question. She did not move away. Outside, snow covered Blackwood in silence. Inside, Emily finally understood that the heart did not always announce when it began again. Sometimes it simply stayed when it was free to leave. 3 days after the storm, Alexander returned to the eastern garden for the first time. Emily found him beside the frozen fountain where he had once shown her the moonstone ring, his black coat buttoned against the cold and a cup of untouched coffee warming his hands. "The physician said short walks," she reminded him. "This is a short walk. You have been out here 20 minutes. Alexander glanced toward her. "You have been counting?" Emily opened her mouth, then stopped. His faint smile made warmth rise into her cheeks despite the winter air. "Someone has to make sure you follow instructions. I am beginning to suspect you enjoy ordering me around. Only when you deserve it." The words came easily now. That surprised her. With Ryan, she had spent years measuring herself against what he needed. Around Alexander, she was beginning to hear her own voice again. They walked beneath bare trees wrapped in tiny winter lanterns, their footsteps crunching softly over frost. Emily carried something inside her coat. She had spent the morning deciding whether to bring it. At last, she stopped beneath an old pine and withdrew the cream-colored handkerchief she had packed at Silver Pine. Alexander recognized it immediately. "You still have yours," Emily said. "I do." "Then I thought you should see this." She opened her hand. The same crooked black branches crossed the corner. Alexander stared at the cloth, then at her. "You made 2. I was terrible at embroidery." "I noticed." Emily laughed. "That is a dangerous thing to say to someone considering whether she likes you." His expression changed at the word likes. The amusement softened into something quieter. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken, but she did not look away. 7 years ago, she said, you left because you thought I had chosen Ryan. Alexander nodded. And when I came here, you offered me another choice. Yes. You never asked me to forget him. No, you never asked me to repay you for waiting. Alexander's gaze held hers. Love that requires repayment is a debt. I never wanted to be your creditor. Emily swallowed. For years, she had imagined love as endurance. Waiting longer. Giving more. Asking for less. Alexander had somehow shown her another possibility simply by refusing to take what she had not freely offered. She stepped closer. When they told me your carriage had not returned, I thought I had waited too long again. Alexander became completely still. Emily, you do not owe me an answer because you were frightened. I know. And you do not owe me one because I waited. I know that too. She reached into his coat pocket before losing her courage, then stopped herself with an embarrassed smile. The ring. Understanding crossed his face. Alexander removed the small velvet box and placed it in her palm. He did not open it. Emily did. The moonstone caught the pale afternoon light. She looked at it for a long moment before lifting her eyes. I cannot promise that 7 years disappear because I want them to. I would never ask that. But I can decide what happens after them. Alexander barely seemed to breathe. Emily took the ring from the box. You waited while I loved someone else, she whispered. I will not ask you to wait while I pretend I do not know what I feel now. Alexander's voice was almost lost beneath the wind. And what do you feel? Emily smiled through the sudden sting behind her eyes. I choose you. He closed his eyes for one brief second, as though those 3 words carried more weight than any royal oath. When he opened them, Emily placed the ring into his hand and held out her fingers. Alexander slipped it on carefully. Warmth moved through her palm, gentle and bright, and somewhere deep within her, her Omega spirit answered with a quiet certainty she had never felt before. Alexander looked at her as if the entire world had gone silent. Then he leaned forward slowly enough for her to choose again. Emily met him halfway, and their kiss was brief, tender, and full of everything neither of them needed to rush. When they parted, Alexander rested his forehead lightly against hers. Are you certain? Emily looked at the moonstone on her hand, then back at the man who had never once demanded certainty from her. For the first time in years, she said, I am. The wedding announcement traveled through the northern territories before the last winter snow had melted from the Blackwood rooftops. By the morning of the ceremony, carriages lined the palace road for nearly 2 miles, carrying alphas, council leaders, and noble families who had come to witness their king choose his queen. Emily stood before the tall mirror in her chamber while an attendant fastened the final pearl at her sleeve. Her gown was ivory, simple by royal standards, with silver embroidery shaped like pine branches along the cuffs. She had chosen the pattern herself. When she looked at her reflection, she did not see the Omega who had stood silently at Silverpine while another woman received the future she had been promised. She saw Emily Carter. That was enough. A soft knock came at the door. Miss Carter, the ceremony begins in 15 minutes. Emily nodded and reached for her cloak. The corridor outside was quiet, but when she entered the small gallery leading toward the ceremonial hall, someone was waiting beside the windows. Ryan. For a moment, neither spoke. He looked different from the man she remembered, though perhaps only because she was seeing him without 7 years of hope between them. Emily. His voice carried none of its old certainty. Ryan. His gaze fell to the moonstone ring on her hand. So it is true. Yes. He swallowed. Victoria and I ended our engagement. Emily felt no triumph. Only a distant sadness for 2 people who had tried to build a future from advantage instead of affection. I am sorry. Ryan gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You really mean that? I do. He stepped closer, then stopped. I made a mistake. Emily said nothing. I thought choosing Victoria would make Silverpine stronger. Instead, every agreement came with another condition. Every favor had a price. His eyes searched hers. I kept thinking about you. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around her cloak. Ryan, please do not do this today. I need to ask one thing. He drew a careful breath. If I had chosen you that night, would you still be standing here today, about to marry him? The question reached backward through years of memories. Emily could have lied. She chose not to. No hope flashed across Ryan's face so quickly that it hurt to see. Emily continued before he could speak. If you had chosen me, I probably would have spent my life believing that waiting for someone was the same as being loved by them. The hope disappeared. Then this is because of what I did. No, Emily shook her head. What you did opened a door. Alexander never pushed me through it. Ryan looked toward the ceremonial hall, where distant music had begun. He had years to take you from me. Emily's expression softened. That is the difference between you. Ryan frowned. Alexander never believed I was something to take. Silence settled between them. Emily looked at the man she had once imagined growing old beside and realized she no longer needed him to regret losing her. She only needed to stop carrying the girl who had waited for him. I hope you become the Alpha Silverpine needs, she said. And I hope someday you choose someone because you value who she is, not what her name can purchase. Ryan lowered his eyes. I am sorry, Emily. She believed him. Forgiveness came quietly, without restoring what had ended. Goodbye, Ryan. Emily walked past him and continued toward the great doors. They opened before her, revealing hundreds of guests beneath silver lanterns. At the far end stood Alexander. He wore no smile of victory. He simply held out his hand and waited. Emily crossed the hall toward him freely, one step at a time. And when she placed her hand in his, Alexander whispered the same question he had honored from the beginning. Are you certain? Emily looked into his silver-gray eyes. Yes. This time, there was nothing left behind her that she wished she had chosen instead. Alexander did not turn toward the gathered nobles when Emily reached him. For one suspended moment, the hundreds of people beneath Blackwood's silver lanterns seemed to disappear from his awareness. His attention rested entirely on her. Emily felt his hand beneath hers, warm and steady, but his fingers did not close until she gently closed her own. Only then did the tension in his shoulders ease. The royal elder stepped forward to begin the final vow, yet Alexander raised one hand. A murmur moved through the hall. Emily looked at him in surprise. He turned toward her, his silver-gray eyes carrying the same patience she had seen beside the frozen fountain. There is one question I want answered before any crown, law, or tradition speaks for us. The room became silent. Alexander took both of her hands. Emily Carter, before these families, before every pack represented here, and before the moon that has watched us take separate roads for 7 years, will you choose me? Freely? Emily felt emotion rise into her throat. He could have announced her as his Luna. He could have invoked destiny, royal authority, or the bond already awakening between them. Instead, even here, he gave her the one thing that had changed her life. Choice. She smiled. I choose you, Alexander Blackwood. Warmth moved through her hands and spread gently through her chest. Somewhere deep within her, the quiet Omega spirit she had spent years teaching herself to diminish seemed to lift its head. Alexander's eyes brightened with recognition. He felt it too. The bond did not arrive like a chain. It felt like a door opening from both sides. The elder smiled and completed the vows. When Alexander placed the royal mantle across Emily's shoulders, the hall bowed. Council leaders lowered their heads. Noble families followed. At the edge of the gathering, Ryan stood among the Silverpine delegation. Their eyes met once. He bowed too. Emily felt no satisfaction in seeing him lower his head. She felt something better. Peace. Ryan had been part of the road that brought her here, but he no longer defined where that road ended. Hours later, after the music softened and the last formal congratulations had been offered, Emily escaped with Alexander to the eastern garden. Moonlight silvered the frozen fountain. The palace behind them still glowed with celebration, but out here there were only pine trees, winter air, and the man who had once carried a crookedly embroidered handkerchief for 7 years. Alexander reached into his coat and unfolded it. Emily laughed softly. You brought that to your own wedding? I considered it essential. It is a terrible piece of embroidery. It is priceless. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For several quiet seconds, neither spoke. Then Alexander looked down at her. Worth the wait. Emily remembered the girl beside Silverpine Lake, the promises she had mistaken for certainty, and the night she had believed rejection meant she had not been enough. She understood now. Her worth had never changed with someone else's choice. She took Alexander's hand and intertwined their fingers. You will not have to wait again. His smile was small, private, and warmer than any crown could ever be. Together they turned toward the palace, where a new life waited beyond the lighted doors. Emily walked beside him, not behind him, carrying no borrowed name to prove her value and no broken promise to measure her heart against. She had once believed love meant waiting until someone finally chose her. Now she knew better. Love was being free to choose, and finding someone who treasured that freedom enough to wait.